I thought I was in control of everything. Until the woman who organized my life looked me in the eye and said 5 words that nearly stopped my heart. Nathaniel Reed had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, shut down hostile takeovers, and stood in front of rooms packed with investors who would have given anything for his approval. At 38 years old, he was the founder and CEO of Reed Capital, one of the fastest-growing investment firms in Manhattan. People called him brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. Nathaniel preferred efficient. Emotions complicated things. Logic built empires. At least, that was what he believed until a Thursday afternoon in early October. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office 72 stories above Midtown. The city below looked small from up there. Yellow cabs crawled through traffic. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Inside the executive suite, everything was quiet except for the faint scratch of a fountain pen moving across paper. Nathaniel sat at the head of a polished conference table reviewing the final contract for a $400 million merger. Across from him, attorneys waited patiently. Analysts watched nervously. One signature and months of negotiations would finally be complete. Then the office door opened. Madeline Hayes stepped inside, carrying a tablet against her chest. Nathaniel barely looked up at first. He didn't need to. After 3 years working together, he could identify her presence without seeing her. The soft click of her heels. The faint scent of vanilla coffee she always carried. The calm confidence in the way she entered any room. She stopped beside him and waited until he glanced up. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "I just wanted to let you know I'll be leaving right at 6. Nathaniel nodded absently. "Fine. I have a date tonight." The room remained silent. Nobody reacted. Nobody except Nathaniel. His pen stopped moving. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just a tiny pause in the middle of his signature. A fraction of a second. But something strange happened inside his chest. "A date?" he heard himself ask before he realized he was speaking. Madeline smiled politely. "Yeah." She checked the screen of her tablet. "Actually, I should probably leave a little early. I need time to get ready." Nathaniel stared at her. The words should have meant nothing. Employees had dates. Employees had lives. Employees certainly didn't require their CEO's approval before seeing someone for dinner. So why did the idea bother him? "I see," he said. Madeline nodded. "I'll make sure everything is wrapped up before I go." Then she turned and walked out of the room. The door closed behind her. Nathaniel looked back down at the contract. The signature line blurred for a moment. $400 million sat in front of him. Months of work. Endless meetings. Countless flights. Yet somehow all he could think about was one question. Who was taking Madeline Hayes out tonight? And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Reed signed the wrong page. Nathaniel spent the next 30 minutes pretending nothing had changed. The attorneys continued discussing numbers. Analysts reviewed projections. Someone asked a question about risk exposure in the European market. Normally, he would have answered before the sentence was finished. Today he stared at the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word. By the time the meeting finally ended, Manhattan was fading into the soft gray light of late afternoon. One by one, everyone left the conference room until only Nathaniel remained. He loosened his tie and looked out at the skyline. Thousands of windows reflected the setting sun. Somewhere down there, millions of people were finishing work, heading home, meeting friends, living ordinary lives. Madeline was one of them. The thought should not have bothered him. Yet it did. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Madeline stepped into the office carrying a stack of folders. "These need your approval before tomorrow morning." Nathaniel accepted them. Their fingers almost touched. He immediately looked away. "Anything else?" he asked. "No. That should be everything." She smiled. The same easy smile she gave him almost every day. The same smile he had somehow stopped noticing until now. As she turned toward the door, Nathaniel found himself studying details he had ignored for years. The way she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The way she always carried a navy notebook filled with handwritten reminders. The way she thanked everyone, from senior executives to the receptionist in the lobby, with exactly the same sincerity. "Madeline." She stopped and looked back. "Yes." The question was already forming in his mind. "Who is he? Where are you going? How long have you been seeing him?" Instead, he said, "Good work today." Her smile widened. "Thank you, Nathaniel." Then she was gone. The office felt strangely quieter after she left. Nathaniel sat down and opened the folders she had delivered. Every page was perfectly organized. Every detail anticipated. Every deadline accounted for. That was who Madeline was. Reliable, thoughtful, steady. 3 years earlier, she had joined Reed Capital as an executive assistant. Most people lasted 6 months under Nathaniel's demanding standards. She had survived the first week, then the first month. Eventually, she became the one person who could walk into his office without making him irritated. The one person who told him when he was wrong. The one person who remembered things he forgot. Somehow, she had become part of the rhythm of his life. Not all at once. Quietly. Gradually. Like sunlight moving across a room. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Last winter, during a snowstorm, she had stayed in the office until midnight helping finalize a major acquisition. Another time she had brought him coffee after noticing he skipped lunch for the 3rd day in a row. She never made a big deal about it. She simply cared. The realization unsettled him. Because for the first time, he wondered whether those moments had meant more to him than he had ever admitted. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. Nathaniel glanced at the clock. 5:48. In 12 minutes, Madeline would leave the building. And somewhere in New York, a man he had never met would be waiting for her. At 6 o'clock sharp, the elevator doors closed behind Madeline Hayes, and Nathaniel Reed told himself he would return to work. Instead, he found himself standing beside the window, watching the street 72 floors below. It was ridiculous. New York City held more than 8 million people. Madeline could disappear into that crowd in seconds. Yet his eyes searched for her anyway. When he finally spotted a familiar navy coat emerging from the building entrance, an unexpected sense of relief settled over him. Then she disappeared around the corner, and the feeling vanished just as quickly. Nathaniel frowned at himself. What exactly was wrong with him? He had spent years building a life that ran on discipline. Every hour had a purpose. Every decision had a reason. Emotions belonged in boardrooms only when they could be used as leverage. Yet tonight, none of his usual rules seemed to work. He returned to his desk and opened his laptop. Quarterly reports filled the screen. Market forecasts, investment projections, important information that normally demanded his complete attention. Instead, his gaze drifted toward a small object resting near the corner of his desk. A ceramic coffee mug, white with tiny blue flowers painted around the rim. Most people would not have noticed it. Nathaniel did. 3 months earlier, he had accidentally shattered Madeline's favorite mug during a rushed morning meeting. The next day, he had quietly replaced it. Not because he felt guilty, he had told himself. Simply because it was the professional thing to do. At least that was the explanation he had accepted. Another memory surfaced. Last spring, Madeline had forgotten her scarf after leaving for a client presentation. Nathaniel had driven 20 blocks through afternoon traffic just to bring it to her before the temperature dropped. He remembered her surprised smile when he handed it over. "You really did not have to do that. You would have been cold," he had replied. At the time, the gesture seemed insignificant. Tonight it felt different. One memory became another. The extra coffee he always ordered because he knew exactly how she liked it. The notebook she carried everywhere, filled with neat handwriting and colorful tabs. The way she laughed when she thought nobody was paying attention. The way his mornings somehow felt smoother whenever she was around. Nathaniel leaned back slowly. For years he had convinced himself those details meant nothing. Now he was no longer sure. His phone buzzed on the desk. Instantly his eyes moved toward the screen. Not Madeline. Just another email. The disappointment arrived before he could stop it. He stared at the device for several seconds. Then he laughed quietly under his breath. Not because anything was funny. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Somewhere across Manhattan, Madeline was spending the evening with another man. And Nathaniel Reed, a man who controlled billion-dollar investments without losing sleep, suddenly cared far more about that fact than he cared about anything waiting on his desk. By 7:30 that evening, Nathaniel had abandoned any illusion that he was accomplishing meaningful work. The reports remained open on his laptop. Emails continued arriving. Messages from executives in Chicago, Dallas, and San Francisco filled his inbox. Normally, he would have answered every one of them before dinner. Tonight, he read the same sentence 5 times and still could not remember what it said. The city outside had transformed. Office lights glowed across Manhattan like scattered stars. Rain still drifted against the glass in soft waves. Nathaniel checked the time. 7:32. Then 7:37. Then 7:41. He told himself to stop. Instead, he reached for his phone. No messages from Madeline. Why would there be? She was not working. She was not responsible for updating him about her evening. The logical part of his mind understood that perfectly. The rest of him seemed determined to ignore logic entirely. At 8:15, he finally left the office. His driver opened the door of the black sedan waiting downstairs. During the ride home, Nathaniel stared through the window at crowded restaurants filled with people laughing over dinner. Every time he passed one, his imagination supplied the same image. Madeline sitting across from a man, smiling, listening, sharing stories she had never shared with him. The thought tightened something inside his chest. By the time he reached his penthouse overlooking Central Park, the irritation had become impossible to dismiss. He loosened his tie and poured a glass of sparkling water. The apartment was exactly as he had left it that morning. Quiet, organized, immaculate. Yet tonight it felt strangely empty. He walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Immediately, he noticed a small container sitting on the second shelf. Madeline had left it there after a late meeting the previous week. Homemade blueberry muffins. She had brought them for the office staff and insisted everyone take one home. Nathaniel had taken two. He stared at the container for a moment before shaking his head. This was becoming ridiculous. At 8:56, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. His pulse jumped before he could stop it. Madeline. For a second, he simply stared at her name. Then he opened the message. Sorry, I will be late tomorrow morning. I may need an extra hour. Nathaniel read the words twice. Then a third time. Late tomorrow morning. An extra hour. His imagination immediately filled the gaps. The date was going well. Better than expected. Maybe they were talking for hours. Maybe neither of them wanted the evening to end. Nathaniel set the phone down. The apartment suddenly felt much larger than before. Much quieter. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched into the distance. Somewhere out there, Madeline Hayes was building memories with someone else. And for the first time, Nathaniel could not escape a painful realization. He did not merely miss having her around. He was jealous. Sleep never came. Nathaniel spent most of the night moving from one room to another, carrying the same restless thoughts with him. Around midnight, he tried reading. At 1 o'clock, he opened financial reports. By 2 o'clock, he was standing in front of the windows again, watching the city glow beneath a blanket of clouds. Somewhere out there, Madeline was still awake. At least that was what his mind insisted on believing. He hated how easily his imagination worked against him. Every possibility felt worse than the last. Maybe the date had gone so well that neither of them wanted to leave. Maybe they had discovered they shared the same sense of humor. Maybe the man had made her laugh the way she laughed with coworkers during office lunches. Nathaniel closed his eyes. He did not even know what the man looked like, yet he already disliked him. The realization should have embarrassed him. Instead, it unsettled him. By 6:30 the next morning, he was already dressed and sitting behind his desk. The office floor remained mostly empty. Cleaning crews finished their final rounds. Coffee machines hummed quietly in the break room. Nathaniel checked the time. 7. Then 7:15. Then 7:30. Madeline was never late. In 3 years, she had arrived before him almost every day. 7:45. Still nothing. His phone remained silent. His inbox remained empty. The absence of her usual morning schedule felt louder than any conversation. At 8:12, the elevator doors finally opened. Nathaniel heard familiar footsteps approaching before he saw her. A moment later, Madeline appeared carrying her navy notebook and a paper coffee cup. She looked tired, not exhausted, just slightly different. Her hair was pulled back more casually than usual. A soft smile lingered on her face, as if she were replaying a pleasant memory. Nathaniel's stomach sank. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Sorry I am late." He stared at her for a second longer than necessary. "You usually are not." "I know." She set several folders on his desk. "I appreciate your patience." Patience. The word almost made him laugh. He had spent the entire night battling thoughts he could not control. His eyes drifted toward the coffee cup in her hand, then toward the faint smile she still carried. Every small detail seemed to confirm the same conclusion. The date had been a success. "So," Nathaniel said carefully, pretending to review a document. "How was your evening?" Madeline paused. Then she smiled again. A genuine smile. The kind that reached her eyes. Honestly, she said, it was wonderful. The answer hit harder than he expected. Wonderful. One simple word. Nathaniel looked down at the papers on his desk before she could notice the reaction on his face. Wonderful meant there would probably be another date. Wonderful meant someone else had become part of her world. Wonderful meant he might already be too late. And as Madeline turned to begin her morning tasks, Nathaniel Reed felt something he had never experienced during any business negotiation, investment risk, or corporate crisis. For the first time in years, he was afraid of losing something that had never belonged to him. Nathaniel managed to get through the morning by focusing on numbers. Numbers were predictable. Numbers followed rules. Numbers did not walk into a room carrying a coffee cup and quietly rearrange an entire person's world. Unfortunately, every time he looked up from his desk, there was Madeline. She moved through the office with her usual confidence, answering calls, coordinating meetings, solving problems before anyone else even noticed them. Nothing about her behavior had changed. She was still the same woman who had worked beside him for 3 years. The only difference was that now he could not stop seeing her. Around noon, his longtime friend and chief legal officer, Graham Sullivan, stepped into the office carrying a tablet. Graham had known Nathaniel since college. He was one of the few people in the world who spoke to him without fear. "You look terrible," Graham said. Nathaniel barely glanced up. "Thank you. You are welcome." Graham dropped into a chair. "Now tell me what is going on." "Nothing is going on." Graham laughed. "You have reviewed the same page for 10 minutes. Nathaniel closed the folder in front of him. "I am busy." "No. You are distracted." Graham studied him carefully. "Is it business?" "No." "Family?" "No." "Health?" "No." Graham leaned back. "Then it is a woman." Nathaniel immediately looked toward the windows. Silence filled the room. Graham's eyebrows rose. "Wow. What?" Nathaniel asked. "That was the fastest confirmation I have ever received." Nathaniel rubbed a hand across his jaw. "It is complicated. The best stories usually are." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Nathaniel surprised himself. "She went on a date." Graham blinked. And apparently it went well." "Who is she?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He did not need to. Graham followed his gaze toward the glass wall overlooking the executive floor. Madeline stood outside speaking with a department manager. A few seconds later, understanding appeared on Graham's face. "Madeline." Nathaniel remained silent. Graham let out a low whistle. "How long?" "I do not know." "That is not an answer." Nathaniel stared at her through the glass. She laughed at something the manager said. The sound did not reach the office, but somehow he could still imagine it perfectly. "Maybe years," he admitted quietly. Saying the words aloud felt strangely irreversible. Graham watched him carefully. "So the real problem is not her date." Nathaniel looked away from the glass. "Then what is the problem?" Graham's expression softened. "The problem is that you finally realized you are in love with her." The sentence landed with unexpected clarity. Nathaniel wanted to argue, wanted to explain, wanted to find a more logical answer. Instead, he found himself thinking about the coffee mug, the scarf, the notebook, the way every room felt different when she was not in it. And for the first time, he stopped fighting the truth. Graham was right. He was not afraid of losing an employee. He was afraid of losing Madeline Hayes. The truth should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything harder. Once Nathaniel admitted his feelings, he could no longer hide behind confusion. Every glance toward Madeline carried meaning now. Every conversation felt different. Every ordinary moment became a reminder of what he stood to lose. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and presentations. Yet no matter how many people spoke, his attention always drifted back to her. Around 4 o'clock, a delivery arrived at the executive floor. A large bouquet of white roses. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. So did half the office. The receptionist carried the arrangement toward Madeline's desk with a smile. "These are for you." Madeline looked genuinely surprised. "For me?" She accepted the card attached to the flowers and read it silently. Then she laughed softly. Not a loud laugh, just enough to brighten her face. Nathaniel felt his stomach drop. White roses. A smile. A card. Every piece fit together too perfectly. The date had gone well. Better than well. Apparently well enough for flowers the very next day. He looked away before she could catch him staring. A few minutes later, she stepped into his office carrying a folder. The bouquet remained visible through the glass wall behind her. Nathaniel forced himself to focus on the paperwork. The Henderson proposal is ready for review, she said. Leave it there. Madeline hesitated. Are you okay? Nathaniel looked up. Why wouldn't I be? You seem distracted today. The irony almost made him smile. She was worried about him while he was quietly falling apart over flowers. I am fine. She studied him for a second longer, as if deciding whether to believe him. Finally, she nodded. All right. After she left, Nathaniel stared at the closed door. Maybe Graham was wrong. Maybe he should keep his feelings to himself. Madeline deserved happiness. If she had found someone special, what right did he have to complicate that? The thought followed him through the evening. By the time the office emptied, he had made a decision. He would let her go, not from the company, from his heart. Some opportunities arrived too late. Some people met at the wrong time. Perhaps this was one of those stories. The next morning, Nathaniel entered the office determined to act normal. Then he saw Madeline sitting at her desk, smiling as she read something on her phone. The bouquet still stood nearby. Bright, elegant, impossible to ignore. She looked happy, happier than he had seen her in weeks. Nathaniel stopped in the hallway and quietly accepted what he believed was the truth. Whoever the man was, he had already succeeded where Nathaniel never even tried. And for the first time since realizing he loved her, Nathaniel wondered whether he had missed his chance forever. 3 days passed before everything changed. Nathaniel kept his distance, convincing himself it was the mature thing to do. He focused on work. He attended meetings. He approved acquisitions. He spoke to Madeline only when necessary. If she noticed the difference, she never mentioned it. Yet every time he saw the white roses on her desk, the decision became easier to justify. She was moving forward. He needed to do the same. Then, on Thursday afternoon, the illusion finally cracked. Nathaniel was leaving a conference room when he overheard a conversation near the reception desk. Madeline was speaking with one of the marketing directors. So how did the blind date go? The woman asked with a grin. Nathaniel stopped walking. He did not mean to listen, but he could not move. Madeline laughed. It was a disaster. The words hit him so suddenly he wondered if he had heard them correctly. A disaster? The director asked. Absolutely. Nice guy, but there was no connection at all. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. Then why were you smiling all week? Because I was relieved it was over, Madeline replied. My aunt has been trying to set me up for months. Now she finally promised to stop. The two women laughed. Nathaniel stood frozen several feet away. Every assumption he had made collapsed at once. No successful romance. No exciting new relationship. No mysterious man sweeping her off her feet. The date he had spent days obsessing over had gone nowhere. Then another thought appeared. The flowers. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. Madeline. She turned immediately. Nathaniel. His eyes drifted toward the bouquet. The roses. Confusion crossed her face before understanding appeared. Oh, she smiled. Those are from the Henderson account. Nathaniel blinked. The Henderson account. Their proposal closed successfully last week. They sent flowers to thank the entire team. She laughed softly. Everyone keeps assuming they came from some secret admirer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nathaniel felt equal parts relieved and embarrassed. Days of sleepless nights. Endless assumptions. All because he never asked a simple question. Madeline tilted her head slightly. Are you okay? The concern in her voice felt genuine. Nathaniel looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who had stood beside him through 3 years of victories, setbacks, impossible deadlines, and ordinary mornings. The woman he could not stop thinking about. The woman who was not in love with someone else. Suddenly the future seemed different. Not guaranteed. Not easy. But possible. For the first time in days, hope replaced fear. Actually, Nathaniel said quietly, I think I need to tell you something. Before Madeline could respond, a voice called her name from down the hallway. She turned instinctively toward the sound. The interruption lasted only a few seconds. Yet when she looked back, Nathaniel had already made up his mind. He was done hiding. And before the day was over, he intended to tell her the truth. That evening, Reed Capital hosted its annual charity gala at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels. Hundreds of business leaders, investors, and community partners filled the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room. Soft music drifted through the air. For everyone else, it was another elegant corporate event. For Nathaniel Reed, it felt like the most important night of his life. He stood backstage holding a prepared speech that suddenly seemed meaningless. Across the ballroom, Madeline sat at a table near the front with several members of the executive team. Every few minutes, he found himself looking in her direction. She was laughing with coworkers, completely unaware of the storm inside his mind. A year ago, speaking in front of 500 people would have been effortless. Tonight, one conversation with one woman felt far more intimidating. When his name was announced, applause filled the room. Nathaniel stepped onto the stage and approached the podium. The audience quieted. Cameras turned toward him. The speech remained in his hand. For several seconds, he simply stood there. Then he looked down at the pages and smiled. I spent the entire week preparing remarks about growth, investments, and future opportunities, he began. A few people chuckled politely. But tonight, I would rather talk about something more important. The room grew still. Nathaniel's eyes found Madeline. She looked surprised. For most of my life, I believed success came from control. The right plan, the right decision, the right strategy. Then one person quietly walked into my life and changed all of that. Madeline's expression shifted. Around her, several co-workers exchanged curious glances. Nathaniel continued. She never asked for attention, never asked for recognition. She simply made every day better than the day before. She reminded me that the most valuable things in life cannot be measured on a balance sheet. A nervous laugh escaped him. Unfortunately, it took me far too long to realize what everyone else probably already knew. Now the entire ballroom was watching. Nathaniel stepped away from the podium. Madeline Hayes, would you come up here for a moment? Gasps and whispers spread across the room. Madeline stared at him in disbelief before slowly rising from her chair. When she reached the stage, Nathaniel met her eyes. The rest of the world seemed to disappear. I spent days convincing myself I had missed my chance, he said softly. I spent even longer pretending you were only my assistant, only my colleague, only my friend. The truth is much simpler. Madeline's eyes glistened. Nathaniel smiled. I love you. I think I have loved you for a very long time. The ballroom fell silent. Then Madeline laughed through her tears. You know, she said, for someone who negotiates billion-dollar deals, you are surprisingly slow. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel laughed too. I deserve that. She took his hand. For the record, I have been waiting for you to figure it out. Applause erupted throughout the ballroom. A year later, the white roses had long since faded. The charity gala had become a favorite company story, and the Navy notebook still sat on Madeline's desk. The difference was that every morning, Nathaniel no longer wondered if she would be part of his future. She already was.